Welcome to Deconversion Therapy. This is Karen in Tennessee.
This is Bonnie down in Florida.
Down under. And welcome to the podcast.
Down under.
Bonnie's going to do most of the talking. You know where to find us. You know what to do. Our merch has been selling so well. Thank you, guys. Everything that we are and want to be is in the description of this episode. Click all the links and enjoy.
I thought you were going to say everything we are is because of you.
Oh, and that.
Yeah, and that too.
Everything
I do for you.
Now we have to pay royalties on that. Every time someone's like, oh, I love listening to your podcast, and they pop up somewhere else, I'm always like, what? Who?
What?
Where? So, of course, thank you guys. And of course, you have reviewed us. Of course you have.
Of course.
But we'd appreciate any of that. We really do. This keeps us going in our twilight years. Anyway,
God.
Bonnie's got, I know. Buddy's got some exciting something for me, and I'm just going to sit back on this one.
Well, okay. So I was over in, I don't know, some tour over in England, and I go into all the charity shops, and they've got really awful, in my opinion, thrift stores over there. I feel like their culture might not waste as much shit as we do. And so not a lot of stuff ends up in their charity shops. But I went in and I always like to look at the books. And there was this book, and it was facing out, whereas all the other ones were, filed accordingly, like
so
a regular
book.
So it was a message. And it was the autobiography of Lenny Bruce. And I always meant to get around to what was Lenny Bruce all about? And if you don't know who that is, it's because he was around on the planet a long time ago. But you might know who he is because he's kind of a secondary character in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I've only seen up to a certain point, but I've seen him in a few episodes, and now I know that he was maybe in 13 of them. So maybe there's a bigger arc than I realize. And maybe more people are going, oh, who is this Lenny character? Was he real? Because apparently Mrs. Maisel was somewhat based on Joan Rivers. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Joan Rivers was kind of hedging and non-committal about what kind of relationship she had with Lenny Bruce. Yeah.
Scandal.
Gotcha. Wow. So,
yeah.
But he was...
So he's an old comedian.
He never got the chance to be old.
He wasn't old when he was 30, etc.
When he was comicking. That's right.
Us. Okay.
Yeah, but when you listen to a lot of comedians and they talk about their influences, they all put him up on a pedestal.
Oh, I hear the name all the time.
Yeah. And we'll get into it, and I'll go a little chronologically.
Johnny Carson, Lenny Bruce,
Lenny Bruce,
and Karen and Bonnie. We hear it day in, day out.
Hear it all the time. So yeah, I haven't gotten to all of the episodes that he's in Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, but what I was reading online I thought was really nice because they said the writers knew that they couldn't write any new material for him to do in the selections of episodes where he was performing because his stuff is very specific and they just couldn't, they didn't want to mess with that.
Right.
So the episode that I was watching last night had something verbatim in there, except they took a tiny bit of license, which I understand, from his autobiography. So that was kind of nice that they didn't make up new comedy.
Right.
Anyway, so you may know him from that. And if I'm going over stuff that you've learned in the TV show, well, that's great because I'm about to watch the rest of it too because I got rehooked last night. It's pretty good.
Nice.
Yeah. All right, so here we go. The background for him, so that we know what we're dealing with. He was born about 100 years ago. This is a modern conversation. But, okay, so he was born in 1925 on Long Island. His parents divorced early. Then his mom decided to take him with her to New York City. And then she was like, this isn't working. And sent him back to live with his dad. So that messes with a kid. Childhood wasn't the best time for him, and it was really unstable. At some point when he was a teenager, he ran away from home and fled to what they called the country back then, which was just Long Island. I guess it wasn't as developed as it is now.
And there are so many good comics out of Long Island.
I guess it's a real...
We've got Pete Davidson.
He's Staten Island.
Shit.
Yeah, but that's okay.
Nobody funny comes out of Long Island.
Not true. That. 2 people from Massapequa. Jerry Seinfeld, Alec Baldwin.
Oops. See, that's because you lived in New York and you understand what Massapequa is. I would think that's another city. I don't understand.
It's Plata, Long Island. Yeah, but
okay.
Long Island.
I know the iced tea. Bum, bum.
I think Judd Apatow.
All right. Yeah. So everyone funny. Got it.
Yeah. They breed them. They breed them funny on Long Island. Okay. So this is the little section. So I'm reading this book. And by the way, it's falling apart as I'm reading it. It was completely pristine when I got it, and no one had opened it for 20 years. And then the minute I open it, crack, pages ruffle. So it's all held together with all sorts of clips and paper clips. But so I'm reading it on the train, and this actually made me laugh out loud. And I was like, oh no, the people on the train and, England don't talk that much. And so to hear somebody laugh out loud, I'm like, oh my God.
Right. They're like American.
I'm going to be shunned. Anyway, I hope you think this is as funny as I do. So he's talking about his childhood in this little passage, and he says, don't read at the table, I would be told. Why do they put stuff on the cereal box if they don't want you to read? Not at the table. When I get big, I thought, I'll read anywhere I want, standing on the subway. What's that you're reading, sir? A cereal box. So that, I was like, oh, I like this guy's brain. That's just funny to me. Anyway.
Exactly. Especially for like 1940 or wherever he would start developing his comedy brain.
Yeah. And so, the mathematical equation is time plus tragedy equals comedy. So, he's got a lot. Okay, so I mentioned that when he was a teenager, he fled to the country. Whatever, he worked on a farm. So this family, adopted him and I guess had him as a farmhand. And he really felt like they were his family. But then after he joined the Navy for 3 years and came back, the woman was like, okay, hi. And he was like, what? Aren't we family? Aren't you excited to see me? I'm like,
that's sad.
It is. It's so harsh. But
that is exactly what goes on in my brain. Like, I would start going, oh my God, they were waiting for me to leave this whole time. Right? And they're so glad that I'm gone.
They got somebody better.
But those 3 years, I thought I was family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess they always say when you go to war, you need somebody to come back to. So at least he had that during the war. The minute he got home.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is going to be another reference to something that is of our generation, but maybe you guys have seen it on repeats because it's still out there. When he was in the Navy, after 3 years, he was ready to be discharged. So he decided to have a friend of his who knew how to sew make some ladies' clothing for him. And he would put on the ladies' clothing, walk around the ship. And sure enough, it worked. He got dishonorably discharged because if you were anything near being a homosexual back then, they were like, beat it, get out. So, eventually, he didn't like the idea that he got dishonorably discharged, and later he petitioned to have that changed. And so they changed it to, and this is a quote, under honorable conditions by reason of unsuitability for the naval service. So, but
I mean, again, wouldn't he get beat up? That's pretty brave.
yeah, I think he was kind of popular in a cut up and,
Oh, I got it. Okay, so he was doing like
tough,
MASH.
That's exactly what that's what I realized. Like, that was totally the inspiration for Klinger's character in MASH, because Klinger starts out the whole series like wearing dresses like, I'd like to be discharged, and they're like, we're not buying it.
Got it.
So, and when you're a kid, you know, oh, that's clever, that's funny. And then you realize, oh, it came from somewhere where somebody really did it. And I love that he did something like that and wasn't afraid. And then I was like, oh, and there's the lyric in the REM song, Lenny Bruce is not afraid. Remember that?
Oh, you're very good at this.
Stop.
Yeah. No, you are.
So I was just telling my mom about this, and that's when I was like, he wasn't afraid. And when you see some of the other shit he did, he wasn't afraid. Okay, so that's what made me want to tell you, or not tell you, but that's what made me interested in it. But then I started reading, and he tackles religion over and over throughout the course of his career. Wow. And I was learning stuff I would never have learned before. He really is very honest about the human body. Talks a lot about nipples and touching them on his bare shaven face. And this is just,
you just made me picture like he has nipples growing from his face.
But he's really,
Harry Styles has a third nipple. Okay.
Really?
Keep going. Yes.
Interesting. Oh my gosh. Okay. So where I was in London is the little suburb where Harry Styles lives. Okay.
Right.
So,
and I gave you assignments and you didn't do them.
I tried to find his house.
Harry Styles hair.
But okay. So there's no even surface in that area. Everything is a hill or cobblestone or brick or uneven sidewalks that are made with pieces of slate that just, I don't know, aren't glued down really well. So I kept thinking, oh, maybe I'll trip and fall. And then Harry will come running out of his house and go, hello, lady who's twice my age. Can I help you? And then it never happened until the very last day. I was on like some tiny little pathway and I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? I should be on the street. And I slipped, and my first thought was, Harry Styles is never going to walk by here.
No, he's not.
No one was going to walk by there. Could have easily just croaked. Anyway, so there's the Harry Styles stuff.
Another middle-aged American woman found dead next to Harry's house.
They keep dying outside my house. Okay, so during the war, he went to visit different houses where sex workers worked. And I'm not using the terminology that he used in a book that was written in 1963. So you can imagine the terminology he used. And a lot of that was what he got in trouble for, which they called obscenity. Okay. So over in France, he said there were 4 settings you could choose from in the houses over there where you went to have your paid for sex. 1, the housewife room. You can imagine what that is. Oh, housewife, total, like, nice domestic situation. Number 2, the nursery, where they dress like young kids. Disgusting. And the fact that that's super popular is, I think it just speaks volumes about men. And the fact that...
only, please.
But I really think that... I don't know, these houses, and that you see them so frequently in the TV show Mad Men. I think a lot of stuff was going on back then that was just accepted.
Oh, I think. Accepted yet not accept. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the third option in the France houses, the torture chamber. Great, okay. S&M, what have you. But number 4, the seminary. Okay. I don't know what the translation.
Just so nuns, we see.
Okay. But hold on. Okay, so I'm going to read you an excerpt from what he says about the seminary. This cost 2,000 francs. I didn't do the conversion rate from francs to dollars and the inflation rate, but it was worth it. He said the room was a bare monastery cell with only a wooden table, some straight chairs, and a straw pallet. Religious statues, pictures, and candles were everywhere. The towel girl led me in and left me alone there, and as I looked around, I was furious that when I would tell my friends in the States about it, they would think it was a lie. Not only that, but they might have me committed. As I was at least as sane as the hundreds of men who visited this place seriously. Men who we would consider decadent and degenerate, and more than that, in some twisted way, fanatically religious. He says, in a moment, my thoughts were interrupted by a beautiful nun, complete in her habit, white starched headpiece, cross around the neck, gold wedding band and all. I was so excited that I offered her a 2,000 franc tip if she would just sit and talk to me in broken English. He said that was a twist, a nun confessing to me. I was fascinated with her description of the operation. Some of her stories made my hair stand on end, but she really threw me into a laughing fit when she told me that a large percentage of her customers were priests. It's true that my philosophy...
There and there.
He says, it's true that my philosophy is anti-organized religion, but I am not making this up. She told me that she had a few rabbis, too.
Well, you know.
Yeah.
She's non-denominational.
That's right. So as soon as I read that, I was like, well, I will keep reading this. Then, okay, so let's see. Chronologically.
I must read about sex for Karen. She needs it for the pod.
It was such an education because that's not the only time that he explained about these houses. And what happened?
I had no idea. I mean, why would I have any idea about that? But
so much sex for money exchanged. So much. Mm-hmm. And then he talked about what's the difference between a lady, and especially back then because they didn't work or do anything, who exchanges her, I guess, virtue for the long term with a husband versus $2 a shot. I'm like,
true.
Okay.
Husband she doesn't like. And the husbands or beaux or whatever are probably off at war anyway. Yeah. So she's like, I got to survive.
Okay. So let's see. So he came back, was rejected by his, farming fake mom and decided to join the Merchant Marines. But right before that, he met a stripper and he fell in love with her, but really fell in love with her. Mm-hmm. So her name's Honey Harlow. And then he quit the Merchant Marines and ended up marrying her. And so here's what he says. Honey and I got married. I was wed to a stripper. Strippers were only a step. All right, we're going to use his vernacular. Strippers were only a step above hookers, even as late as 1951. The first great breakthrough, or rather breakdown, of society's ludity, guilt by association, was the now famous Marilyn Monroe calendar. Marilyn's respectability when she died was based principally on her economic status, which is, in the final analysis, the only type our society really respects. I was like, oh... That's what I always say. It's all about the money.
That's deep. Yeah, I agree.
All about the money. I'm constantly fighting with somebody I work with, and they're like, well, this person shouldn't do that. They're never going to tell that person not to wear a hat to an office meeting because he brings in money. Well, that's just awful. They're never going to do anything because he brings in money.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And it's not that Marilyn didn't have a hard life and that she wasn't intelligent, etc.
No.
But I know exactly what he's saying. Yeah.
She climbed up out of it because she was able to do well. Okay. And then, all right, this kills me. He says, if a girly book was all that was left as a document of this generation, an anthropologist of the year 2965 would logically assume that this culture seemed to be identified with the religious concept of God made my body, and if it is dirty, then the imperfection lies with the maker, the manufacturer, not the product. Do not remove this tag under penalty of law. So this theme comes back over and over again in his writings. And he's like, if God made this part of you, it has to be perfect. Either that or it's either all dirty or all clean. And you don't get to pick and choose. And so then your God is dirty.
True.
Anyway. All right, so
there you go.
So
God, we gotcha.
All right, so they get married, and then she's a stripper. He's not fond of that, but he goes down to Miami Beach, and she's performing, and he's performing and doing, like opening acts for strippers. This is before he was just a comic.
So he started his stand-up.
Yeah, he had started his stuff, and he was, I guess, like an MC, like a presenter.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So then they're down in Miami Beach, and this is where the stuff gets really surprising. And I thought, when he started talking about what I'm about to tell you, I thought, okay, he's just making this up to write a book about something. But he wasn't. So in Miami Beach, his goal was to make enough money for Honey to be able to stop stripping, because he didn't like the feeling that she was so close to being somebody who sold sex for money.
Well, this is how the turntables turn with men.
Is it?
You're like, you're a stripper. I love everything about you. Now I would like you to stop stripping.
Right.
It's... Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so he starts telling in the book, he's like, okay, how to make some quick money and stay out of jail. If Father Divine could do it, why couldn't I? Of course, that would be the gimmick. I would become a priest or rabbi or a monk or whatever the hell was necessary to perform miracles, such as taking money from someone else's pocket and putting it into mine, still remaining within the confines of the law. He says, I had no qualms about the sinful aspect of my aspiration because I felt that all so-called men of God are self-ordained. The calling they hear is just their own echo. Like, oh my God.
That's you and him. Same person. When did he die and when were you born?
Yeah, that's right.
Reincarnation.
So, yeah, well, there's a lot more that I'm leaving out. I'm only telling you the religious tidbits. Tids and bits. Okay, so he realized, that would be too slow of a process because churches and synagogues never came up for rent. They don't go out of business. So he was looking around for a disease that hadn't been exploited yet. So he came across a scrapbook item that was real, that was written about him in the Detroit Free Press. So when he was overseas, he became involved with a leper colony in British Guiana.
Okay. What?
I know. And it was real.
Skipped over that.
So he and his wife did a show for the benefit of them. So it was a good logical choice. So he would just help out this leper colony again. And so there was a nice human interest piece, like how he said, the donations need to be this. All the kids need sunglasses. And so somebody donated a lot of sunglasses because it hurt their eyes a lot, apparently, leprosy.
Right. And that was Ray-Ban.
So he says his logic was the lepers would benefit and so would the good people who contributed. And I would keep 50% for my efforts. Yeah, he said it was no more and certainly much less than the majority of charitable institutions take out for their efforts. They hire professional collecting organizations and ad agencies, which is true. You can go on that site and find out how much of their intake goes to administration.
I have, and I would love to write about it because I dug deep, and there's someone who's done research by going to churches and asking them, are you willing to show
Yeah.
me? 0% go directly to the poor. 0. Like they do all their little, but we did an outreach where we gave them each a can, but they didn't have can openers and all that
We
shit.
did an outreach where we told them how to act. Like, told them how to,
Right.
how to behave. I stole that from Lenny. I'll read more about that. Okay, so he said, I didn't doubt for a moment that if Christ were to come down at that moment, he would go immediately to headquarters and ask the Pope, what are you doing wearing that big ring? What are those gold cups encrusted with diamonds and other jewels for? Don't you know people are starving all over the world? And if Moses were to come down, wouldn't he order all the rabbis to melt down all their mezuzahs and ask people, why have you mocked the 10 Commandments? And ask, what is your interpretation of thou shalt not kill? It's not thou shalt not kill, but... So he's just poking holes.
Before his time.
Yeah. So one of the other things that I thought was interesting is he was doing all this in the 50s. And, our impression of the 50s comes from Happy Days in Greece.
I knew you were going to say Happy Days. Exactly.
Sure, that it was uber wholesome. And clearly, if everyone is going to houses where they purchase sex, it's not. There's something going on that people are way not talking about. Okay. So he says, I knew in my heart by pure logic that any man who calls himself a religious leader and owns more than one suit is still a hustler, as long as there is someone in the world who has no suit at all. So I made up my mind. I'll become a priest. So... Okay, so what was the challenge? Getting the outfit, the uniform. So he decided he would hang around outside a rectory for a couple of weeks, observing the holy men. And the way he did that without them getting wise to him just hanging around and loitering, he sold the Watchtower. He sold issues of the Mormon magazine.
I thought they were for free too. This guy has already figured, give me them Watchtowers for free, and then sells them.
But isn't it like a donation thing? Or maybe back then.
It could be a donation. But if you saw me looking down, I just was looking what the percentage of Americans were Christian or Protestant, Christian claiming in the 50s.
Well, I do have that information for Chicago because that's where he came under trial. He actually went to trial for obscenity.
Well, then I'll wait for that tidbit.
I know, but you know what? You're just thinking. You're thinking.
I'm a thinking person. Me and Lenny, same person, except one is very afraid.
So... He observed these people from hanging out there for a couple of weeks and said that these holy people had the same kind of attitude toward their lessers that successful businessmen had. He treated the lessers like illiterate children. He said they had their cronies too, who they would drink with and tell off-color stories to, and said they were very chameleon-like. He said daily he learned more about how to behave in the manner of men who have the world by the tail. No income tax, no traffic tickets. You live in a world that is on its best behavior, a wonderful, rosy world, and instead of cursing everybody, everyone pours their soul out to you. Like, they're so protected like that.
It is.
The clergy.
And it's so, amazing how... We just allow it. Okay.
Yeah.
I can't. That's another episode.
Well, and this is right on the heels of me watching the documentary on Hulu, God Forbid.
The God Forbid.
Yeah, about the Falwells.
Right. It's all the same, except they don't have pretty outfits.
Uniforms or... okay, so he got the uniform by pretending to be the dry cleaning representative. So he was like,
guy.
yeah. So he would go, okay, so Monday the barber comes, Tuesday the cleaning people come, Wednesday here come the dry cleaners. So he came at the same time, rapped on the door, and they handed him just piles of the uniform. And then as he was leaving with them, the real cleaning person showed up and they're like, what? Who would steal all sorts of these uniforms? And he realized, oh gosh, they realized what happened. And then he said he learned his first important lesson in theology. Always insist on an official receipt for your dry cleaning. Okay, so he stole the uniforms. Let's see. Oh.
But when did the blind man come?
To
Karen's
fix the
favorite
blinds.
show.
That's right. So yeah, and so this explains why things went bad quickly. When he went up to get the uniforms, the priest who gave him the handful of uniforms said, haven't you been selling the Watchtower? And he said, yeah, but he didn't agree with their editorial policy, so he got a job with the dry cleaners.
And of course, I'm picturing just like this old, bony, naked priest who's
Right?
like, here are the clothes.
I wanted to get them all out today, so just
We're only
my
given one.
undershorts on. Okay, so he gets the uniform. He dresses up as a priest. He drives around Miami Beach. Miami Beach, you've seen it. You've been there recently, which is ironically where the hostel was that Jerry Falwell invested in. So, you know Miami Beach. So his wife's convertible had like animal print seats. So he's driving around as a priest with the animal print seats. So he goes up to various houses. And of course, it's all the housewives' home. And he goes to a neighborhood that's not poor. You know, he goes to the ones that are red on the water. So in 2 days, he made 9 visits to houses, had 1 rejection. Right. 1. And this is also part of the time. Like, what priest would go door to door these days? It's just not happening. Right. But the way things were back then.
Or anyone door to door.
Or anyone.
Like, yeah. Then it was just sort of a thing that was done.
Yeah, especially door-to-door salesmen. But you've got the outfit on, and he was like, this outfit gives me entree to everything. It's like a free pass. So he says he always found women at home who wanted to bare their souls about their husbands. So after 2 days, he had collected $5,300.
Golly.
I know.
And that is equal to...
Well... He totaled $8,500 after a few more days were added in. And with inflation, that is $97,000 in today's dollars. That's so much money.
God.
I mean, what a great plan, though, to make enough money to keep your wife, you know, from having to strip.
God. That I want to think of all the details in that. And I don't want my wife to strip, and I'm getting money from women.
It's like you're reading my notes, because the next thing that I have down here, his wife was suspicious. Honey.
Look at my brain. Right? It's huge.
It's like there's no skull. I can see it moving. Okay, so she said to him, something is up. No woman is going to give you $750 for just talking. And then she ripped through all of his clothes looking for any like tissues, Kleenex and lipstick and notes and phone numbers. And he's like, no, I'm serious. They just want to talk to me. And then he says it was like he was a therapist. And then boop, they give him a check. So sure enough, he goes back out one day and the police stopped him. And they're like, oh, we've been getting some reports here of somebody, what do they say? Not loitering. I don't know. Marketing. That's not it. Racketeering. Soliciting. Thank you. Yeah. So it was at an intersection of a couple of streets, and I looked it up on Google. It's a beautiful neighborhood. All the houses are lush, and they're right on the water. So at this intersection, all the ladies, the biddies, come out of their homes and they see the police are stopping him and giving him a hard time. And they're mad. And they're like, we're not going to let him take you, Father. These police officers belong to Satan's army. So the ladies kept coming out of their houses. One of them had a gun.
ACAB.
One of the ladies had an elephant gun and said, we're behind you. And they sang, I'm brave when he walks with me. And then
I don't know that one.
I don't either.
It goes well with a elephant gun.
So they just kept saying that they were behind him. And if you don't want to get into that police car, we'll support you. Anyway,
wow.
The police went to his hotel room and they found the charter for the actual registration that he did for the Brother Matthias Foundation because he registered it. He wasn't stupid.
Wow.
And so they found him not guilty. He said he sent $2,500 to the lepers and then he and his wife split town. They went to Philadelphia.
Wow.
So, I know. That's enough to live on for a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Damn, we need to start this cult.
Why?
But that's...
Why aren't we figuring out how to trick people out of their money? Because we're afraid.
We are afraid. And we don't have strippers for wives.
I know. All right. So one of the things that he, one of his just bits and pieces are scattered throughout here. He was thinking about organized religion and pondered, why don't religious institutions use their influence to relieve human suffering instead of sponsoring things like the Legion of Decency, which dares to say that it's indecent that men should watch some heavy-titted Italian starlet because those breasts are dirty. Then he describes the breasts. That's where I was telling you, I had to... Boy, there's so much I'm not telling you that he describes in here. He says, all I want is for them to come out and stop issuing sanctimonious bullshit, saying one thing while pursuing the opposite. And since they condone capital punishment, I want them to stop bitching about Jesus getting nailed up.
Oh!
If people said this today, they'd be in some hot shit.
Exactly.
I meant to say deep shit and hot water, but it came out.
It's all. It is hot, boiling shit.
So another little bit, he said, I'm confused about the direction of heaven because the earth revolves and sometimes you can go to hell at 8:30 and heaven at 12:06. Okay. So they drove to Pennsylvania. He had a sign in his car that said clergy. So,
which they used to have. Right. I don't know if they have that anymore, but
I don't either. I haven't seen it in a while because parking lots are such a thing in our life too. It's not like a city.
And it used to be like clergy could drive fast if they're hey, I've got to go do last rites. Don't give me a ticket.
Right. So I love a good Roman numerals joke. So his joke was that the car was gone and he assumed that it was stolen. And he says, oh my gosh, should I call the police? No, I'll call headquarters. Hello, operator, give me Rome. IVMLV. Okay, that's just me loving a good Roman numerals joke. All right. So then he talks about coming up with Religions, Inc., which is just the business side of religion. Concept of religions as corporations and the meetings that they would conduct. And he would say oh, well, guys, this year we've got a tie-in with Oldsmobile and I don't expect any of you out there in the pulpit to make a hard sell. But I was thinking maybe if you just every once in a while threw in, terms like drive the car that he would drive. So let's see. Then he got arrested again. For obscenity. But this I thought was really interesting. According to Variety, the entertainment newspaper, They said the prosecutor is at least equally concerned with his indictments of organized religion as they are with the more obvious sexual content of his act. It's possible that his comments on the Catholic Church have hit sensitive nerves in Chicago's Catholic-oriented administration and police department.
I bet that's so true. And if you haven't watched The Keepers, it is very dark, but how, like, the Catholic Church in some cities were so connected to police.
Is The Keepers the one
and power
where the girls were in school? And
yes. Yeah. The nun that died, and then they went deeper to try and figure out. It'll mess you up.
That was such a good show.
And I solved it. Like I said, I tweeted the Archdiocese of Baltimore and said, I'm watching you.
That he
Turned
was
everything
scared.
around. He, them, they, all scared.
So in Chicago, he had one of his obscenity trials. He had many, but one of the big ones was in Chicago. And ultimately, he was found not guilty. But of the 50 people that were in the jury pool, 47 of them were Catholic. 47.
Oh, yeah.
The jury eventually, it was all Catholics. And so is the judge, and so is the prosecutor and his assistant. And he said on Ash Wednesday, it was hilarious because all the people in the court came with ashes on their forehead. And the judge was telling them to wipe that off. So
And they're, oh, man.
Well, in Chicago, they were talking about what a crazy high percentage of everybody were Catholic. And there were like 3,500,000 some odd people in Chicago at that point. And I looked it up today thinking, oh my God, Chicago's probably twice as big now. It's less. It's like 2,500,000. Like Chicago was just packed as shit with people because it was an up and coming city and everybody was moving there. Immigrants were moving in. So it's just so crazy how...
No contraception.
That's right. They just kept poking out. So let's see. That was one of his obscenity charges. Let's see. In Los Angeles, and then he bopped around from different places. He worked with Honey, introducing the strippers. I just liked these names. One of the strippers' names was Stacey Farrell, and she was known as Eartha Quake. And then there was Betty Ball of Fire Rowland.
Obviously.
Sure. So I mentioned that because during all of the shows that he did like that, he was getting popular and friendly with the musicians. That's when they say he got introduced to amphetamines and other drugs like heroin.
Well, it's always it's
always the musicians. All right. So there was a bit about him. So a lot of that was from his autobiography that I just gave you. Another source is the Museum of the Jewish People. And I loved their website. And just for context, it was happening during the 1950s, his rise to fame and performing. And a lot of the Jewish performers at that time wouldn't use their real names because they wouldn't talk about anything that was controversial. They just wanted to be seen as all Americans. So they named a few of the comedians of the time. Mel Brooks, whose real name is Melvin Kaminsky. Danny Kaye, whose actual last name is also, oddly, Kaminsky. And then Rodney Dangerfield, who was Rodney Cohen. I mean, Lenny used a fake last name, too. He was Lenny Schneider, but everyone changed their names then. But
if he is related to Rob Schneider, I am erasing this whole episode.
I'm just going to delete it. So while all of these people were just trying to be the all-American and blend in and just entertain everybody, he did the exact opposite. He laughed at Gentiles, Christians, Judaism, the relations between the two faiths. In the 50s, when the threat of Senator McCarthy was everywhere, a lot of the Jews just wanted to integrate. not make a fuss. But it says he poked a finger right in the eye of Christian American society and kept it down. He said, "We Jews killed Christ, and if he comes back, we'll kill him again." Like, not cool. Oh,
ballsy.
so this is the one that I loved, and I think you'll enjoy. Some of his bits made it into the Hall of Fame. For example, Jewish or Goyish, where he talked about how certain things were affiliated with the way Jews do things, and then the non-Jews, the Goys. He also said that Mormons called non-Mormons Goys as well, which I thought was interesting. I'd never heard that.
Appropriation.
He says, if Jesus was killed in our generation, Catholic school children would be wearing little electric chairs around their necks.
Right. Right.
Can you imagine? All of the churches would just have little chairs of torture.
Or syringes, if it was the sleeper medicine.
Oh, God. I never... But you're the one who always points out to me how sick that is.
Yeah.
And...
It's...
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. They also branded him a sick comic because of how much profanity and the topics that he, dealt with.
I'm sure he would just be,
Yeah. And there were different obscenity laws back then. Like, you can say stuff now you absolutely couldn't say back then.
Right.
Anyway.
I mean, that there's even obscenity laws compared to now is crazy.
I wonder how many houses where you can go and have sex there are now, though. Wouldn't you really like to know
house.
That? Stop. For money.
I guess any... well, you've got the whole Nevada thing, the Bunny Ranch and all that, where it's legal, but
that wasn't legal anywhere else. Anyway. Okay.
No, I mean, they're still there, but
yeah. All right, so one of his other jokes was he was really glad that people were leaving the church and going back to God. Funny. Okay, let's see. One of his other thesis statements was that if what you do in the bedroom is dirty, then you're a true atheist, because if you believe that God made the body and the body is dirty, then the problem lies with the maker. And he challenged that some parts of the body are clean and some are dirty, but he didn't see that in the Bible. He said the confusion comes from the celibate religious leaders claiming that this is what should be, and that whatever they claim should be isn't really what is. And so the whole naming of things and behavior and concepts is what should be isn't actually something we've ever seen. And so it's like a huge lie that they've made up for people to measure up to.
Right. And I think that's really good. Like if you, do things in the bedroom, etc., or whatever.
And think of all
to call you an atheist.
And the Liberty Way, the rules for the kids who attend Liberty College are so strict, but it's not what is. But somehow they can get fined and expelled if they don't live up to it.
And the whole idea, to me, is what exactly happened at our Christian college, that it took me forever to realize that parents brought up in that time when there were obscenity laws and other things feel very comfortable sending their kids. It's not always about the kids wanting to do something. It's like they will be safe here.
Yeah.
Or they won't do bad things if they are put somewhere with all these strict rules.
Yeah.
But we know everyone coming out of Liberty University a freak.
Everyone. Every single one.
Everyone. I have the stats. Well, I'll just go ahead and interrupt quickly to say I did look up the percentage of Americans who proclaimed that they were Christian in the 50s, 90%. Yeah. That is, and 90%, and you have to understand that Jews existed. So, that's insane. And that he is saying that stuff. Yeah. Quite ballsy, Mr. Lenny Bruce. Shapiro. I forget what his last name was.
So he also did a bit about Christ and Moses because he liked both of them. And this was one of them that made it like almost verbatim into Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. He said Christ and Moses were standing in the back of St. Patrick's Cathedral, and he was confused. Christ was confused by the grandeur of the interior of the church. His route took him through Spanish Harlem. He would wonder, why are 50 Puerto Ricans living in one room here in Spanish Harlem? That stained glass window is worth $9,000. So he says,
exactly.
Jesus calling the Pope, will you get me Rome? Hey, what's happening? Let's see. Talked about his trials. I think he had like 6 different obscenity trials.
Wow.
One of the big ones was Chicago, and then one of the giant ones that became the OJ trial of the day took 6 months. Mm-hmm. And they said it was just a media circus.
Over like a joke?
They arrested him in a club for obscenity, but, New York had its share of Catholics too. So I think
for
what
sure.
Variety had said was really valid. It was more, and, he also, this is scattered through in his career, he did a lot of drugs. So he would have the drugs and he would get in trouble with the police because he had the drugs. And then he would snitch on the drug dealers. And so he was constantly snitching on the drug dealers to keep him out of prison.
That's not great. Yeah.
So, he was just generally trouble. And how they just didn't like it. And if you watch the True Hollywood Story, the 2 police officers who were like on his case in Los Angeles, you could just tell it was just a fight for power kind of thing. Especially the way they talked about him.
Who hosts the Hollywood Story on him?
There wasn't
Mary
like
Hart.
No. There was just a random narrator and then clips from a lot of people.
Yeah.
So let's see. So at one point there was a letter that he got, and it was from Reverend Sidney Lanier, the vicar of the St. Clement's Church in New York. And basically this is just a little bit of it. It said, "Dear Mr. Bruce, I came to see you the other night because I had read about you and was curious to see if you were really as penetrating a critic of our common hypocrisies as I had heard. I found that you are an honest man, and I wrote you a note to say so. It's never popular to be so scathingly honest, whether it is from a nightclub stage or from a pulpit, and I was not surprised to hear you were having some trouble." This letter is written to express my personal concern and to say what I saw and heard on Thursday night. He goes on and says, that he doesn't believe it's obscene and that his intent wasn't to excite sexual feelings, blah, blah, blah. But instead, he says it's clear that you're intensely angry at our hypocrisies, yours as well as mine. And I like this. The highly subsidized mealy-mouthism that passes as wisdom. He says, clearly your shows are aimed at adults and not kids. And so this is the person who should be choosing whether or not to come in. You're not forcing a kid to watch it.
Right.
Oh, but then I like this. His comment about the letter says, the argument is that a child will ape the actions of an actor. So what he sees now in his formative years, he might do as an adult. So we have to be very careful what we let the child see. And he says, so then I would rather my child see a stag film than the 10 Commandments or King of Kings, because I don't want my kid to kill Jesus. All right. Let's see. So big obscenity charge came. The one in New York at the 6-month trial, that's the one where he was found guilty. And he had never been found guilty before. He always got off.
Right. what gets me about what that pastor or priest or whatever wrote is I know you weren't trying to incite sexual feelings. Like that is any kind of measure of either obscenity or
Lewdness.
whatever. That's crazy. Because then you have to have people say, yes, I was excited when you just said, like, there's a whole, that's a real messy topic right there.
It's so messy. And it was also for adults. I mean, even on some of the programs, it said, adults only, not for children, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
What kid would be at a stand-up show at midnight?
Don't know.
So he, let's see, a lot of celebrities of the day, artists, came to his support, like Woody Allen, Bob Dylan, Allen Ginsberg, Norman Mailer.
Let's skip over Woody Allen for now.
Of the day. So he was sentenced in December of 1964, but was set free on bail. So during the appeals process, he died before the appeal was decided.
Shit.
Yep.
Wow.
So in 1966, he was 40. And that's when he died. And part of the True Hollywood story, of course, they suggested that his death by overdose might not have been an accident because he had cooperated so many times with the police to stay out of jail and snitched on drug dealers.
Right.
They suggested he was given a term that I had never known before, a hot fix that day, which would be an intentionally high amount of drugs that would cause him to overdose. So he was naked on the toilet with the needle in his arm. So either he fell off the toilet, overdosed accidentally, or committed suicide. And people were like, well, he was a troubled soul, but they didn't think that would be what he was doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and if he snitched on those people and he was going to jail and he knew they're going to kill me in jail. So
well, if he turned on the drug dealers enough times, the grizzled LA cop was like, I'd want to say sayonara, sucker. Yeah, that could have been.
Right.
So that's pretty much it. He just had a lot of, I thought, really interesting takes on religion.
Especially for that early and to be that outspoken. And obviously he influenced Carlin and Ricky Gervais and other people who actually call out the church. That's pretty fascinating. I love like this strain of doing something is like finding comedians or other people who are outspoken, not just given, talking about Falwell and how trashy he is. This is really fascinating. You did an excellent job.
Thanks for my book report. Oh my gosh.
You only have to be gone a month.
That's right.
By yourself.
To come up with some content.
So it's going to be an expensive and lengthy time till we do another one.
We need a sponsor.
So are there are there any like specials or any roasts or anything that people can watch on YouTube?
Oh, well, Dustin Hoffman played him in a movie. It's called Lenny. Easy to find. They also did a play on Broadway. And as I was looking things up on YouTube, I found this old video of the Dick Cavett show with Gloria Swanson. She had walked out on it and she was great. She said, oh, I have nothing against it. It's just that's not the kind of material I didn't want to hear. I didn't want to be sitting, so close and hearing that. And let's see. The True Hollywood story didn't deal with any of the religious stuff. It just had a lot of old farts who were around him. It's really interesting. I mean, there's so much about him that you can take you could take one facet of his life and not even deal with the other ones. Like I could have told you all this religious stuff, not even mention the drugs and how he eventually, you know, died. Yeah, I don't think that True Hollywood Story was a real good overview.
No, because they probably have to be careful of their listeners and blah, blah, blah. Well, I just looked up, he did have a daughter.
Kitty.
Named...
What?
Listen,
Sorry.
I researched for 1 month overseas for this, so I am going to... And she was in a girl gang film called The Jezebels.
Sure.
She played a buxom yet frail character girl who would do anything to get accepted by tough gang leaders. But it said she also did a little bit of pop singing and opened for George Carlin and Diana Ross.
Aww.
So that's very interesting.
Yeah. It feels like, I don't know if this is true or not, but it feels like there were so fewer people in entertainment back then compared to now that they all intertwined. Like they all knew each other's paths
or
at some point.
Absolutely. The Sinatras, I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there weren't as many content places.
That's right.
For people to become famous. So there was a limited amount.
Yeah.
That's very fascinating. I might watch Lenny.
Yeah, I'd like to see the movie.
And I might go to France and go to one of those houses and say...
Yeah, I'd like to find one of those. Anyway, that to me, I found myself going, I would have never read anything in my life that told me what was really going on like that. If I hadn't read this autobiography. It was so sordid.
There are some sordid, stars, especially back then when so much was hidden and quiet. And
you could bury a story.
Yes,
you could keep everything super, super quiet. I keep going back because last night I also watched the documentary where we were talking about, what is it, God Forbid? On Liberty. And the whole idea that these two dipshits thought they could keep that story under wraps is hilarious.
For years. I didn't realize how many years. Jerry Falwell and John Carlo, all that. Yeah. That's crazy. Right.
But the fact that they thought they could keep it under wraps is just, they got to be nuts.
And that's why when people come up with other conspiracy theories about NASA, all agreeing to this or, different people, I'm like, how... Two people cannot keep a secret. Right. And you think all these huge groups of people who get fired and hired and divorced and married, you don't think someone's going to be like, well, I know something.
Yeah. Anyway, there you go.
Very fascinating. I'm going to go watch that stuff now. We'll put it on I'll put some links on our website, Deconversion Therapy Podcast, that people can watch these movies and stuff like that.
Well, and
because now I'm into them.
This helped me too to believe that it was real. First of all, when I read a paperback and I see that there are photos, I never skip ahead to the photos because I'm afraid that it's going to ruin something.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
So when I got to the photo section, I will send you the 3 photos that were in there. One is of his mugshot from Miami Beach. The second one is his wife, Honey. And when I started reading this book, I thought, this is just completely all made up. And then the other one is his arrest report, which is where I learned where the intersection was that he was asking for money. That's just a shitload of money. Anyway, all right, I'll send these to you.
It's a great con.
It's a good con.
The conned.
Yeah.
To do the con.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.
We'd love you to review us, and adios.
Thanks.